Welcome to our live webcast for the betterment of the structural engineering profession, a joint CASE, NCSEA, and SEI town hall event. Thank you for joining us. At any time, you may adjust your audio using any computer volume settings that you may have. On the bottom of your screen, you will see the Q&A pod. To send a question, click in the text box and type your text. When finished, click the send button or push enter. All questions that you submit will be seen by today's speakers and will be addressed at the end of the presentation. At the conclusion of today's program, you will be redirected to a post-event survey. At this time, I will now turn the floor over to our moderator, Emily Guglielmo, to begin the town hall.
Thank you so much. And thank you to everyone for joining us here today. We're really excited to bring you our second annual Joint Vision for the Future of Structural Engineering Town Hall. As mentioned, this is hosted jointly by CASE, by NCSEA, and by SEI. I am Emily Guglielmo, the immediate past president of NCSEA, and I'm really pleased to be your moderator of this event here today. To kick off our time here together today, we'd like to hear from you. I see some of this already happening in the chat, but either follow the QR code on the screen, or you can go directly to the webpage menti.com and enter the code you see on the screen. We're really interested in hearing where in the world are you joining us from here today. So we'll leave this up here for a second. Those of you who have joined on your phone will already have the opportunity to fill in your answer, but we're really interested, where is our constituency sitting here today? And while you input your location, I'd like to just make a quick personal thanks, note of appreciation for you joining us here today. As mentioned, this is our second annual. As a profession, the three organizations who represent structural engineering believe so strongly that a unified vision and a unified voice is critical to our success. So your attendance here reinforces that message of unity. Really excited to see our responses forming here on the screen. Looks like we have a good contingent I'm seeing from across the United States, but maybe even more excited at some international representation as well. So again, thank you so much for being here today. Before we leave this little word cloud opportunity, I'd like to get one more response out of you all today. So keep your phones out. Our next question we'd like you to answer for us is, what do you enjoy most about being a member of CASE, NCSEA, or SEI? And while you guys, again, are populating your answers, I'll share mine with you in real time. I don't have my phone out with me. I am so thankful to be a member, actually, of all three of these organizations, CASE, NCSEA, and SEI. And while the words I see coming up on the screen really resonate with me, I see learning, connecting, seminars, the word that I would put in this would be community. I think our professional organizations represent a community where we can be part of something that's bigger than just ourselves. We can improve our careers, our companies, and then maybe most importantly, improve our profession. We so much appreciate you sharing your reasons for being part of CASE, NCSEA, and SEI. We appreciate your feedback. And on behalf of the leadership of the organizations, we will commit to an ongoing effort to serve you all of our members, to improve the structural engineering profession. Thank you so much for your input. With that, I'm incredibly honored to introduce you to today's event, featuring the current leaders of the three organizations that represent structural engineering in the United States. Last year, we hosted our first joint vision for the future of structural engineering. It was based on this vision that was adopted in 2019. We shared some of our successes, and maybe most importantly, we made a commitment to an ongoing collaborative relationship towards accomplishing our goals. And I can promise you that during the 2021 town hall and after the 2021 town hall, we listened to you. We captured your comments, your questions, your concerns. We grouped them into themes. We heard you ask us about licensure, leadership, collaboration, advocacy, and business. And we used your feedback from that event to inform our meeting agendas, our future initiatives. And we hope to share some of the ongoing work with you here today. And importantly, to renew our commitment to work collaboratively to improve our profession. Just as a little preview of our time together, we'll start with an introduction of each of our three leaders and their organizations. We'll very briefly remind you of the 10 initiatives in the joint vision. And then we'd like to spend some time, again, sharing some of the amazing successes from the past year. We'll include with a very large chunk of time for you to ask questions. So this is going to be your opportunity to influence the direction of our conversation here today. As mentioned at the beginning, please, at any point in today's session, enter your questions in the Q&A pod as we go. So with that being said, I'd like to start by asking our three panelists to give us some brief background on their organizations. I'd like to introduce you first to Ed Quesenberry, a principal at Equilibrium Engineers and president of NCSEA. Ed, please tell us a little more about NCSEA.
Thanks, Emily. Great introduction, as usual. Well, NCSEA was established in 1993 in response to a perceived need for advocacy and support for the individual practicing structural engineer. Our stated mission is to support practicing structural engineers to be highly qualified professionals and successful leaders. We fulfill this mission through a robust continuing education program, code advancement activities, and advocacy efforts focused on improving the profession and building awareness of it in our communities. NCSEA is comprised of 44 state member organizations or structural engineers associations that represent over 12,000 individual practicing structural engineers. NCSEA advances its mission through offering support and resources to these member organizations. This bottom-up organizational model allows for national level vision to be realized locally through close collaboration with practitioners across the nation. NCSEA is led by a board of directors comprised of 9 practicing structural engineers and is supported by a full-time staff in Chicago. The organization has 12 national level committees covering various aspects of structural engineering practice, the newest of which are resilience and sustainability committees. We hold an annual structural engineering summit and an excellence in structural engineering awards program, both of which were back live in person last month in New York City.
Thank you, Ed. Now I'd like to introduce you all to Brent White, president of ARW Engineers and the current chair of CASE. Brent, please tell us a little bit more about CASE.
Thanks, Emily. So CASE is the Coalition of American Structural Engineers, and CASE is one of several coalitions representing various groups and engineering disciplines within ACEC, the American Council of Engineering Companies. Membership in CASE is firm-based, as is membership in ACEC. This is obviously different than membership in NCSEA through the state SEAs or SEI through ASC membership, which are all individual memberships. CASE's existence extends back to the early 1980s when it had become challenging for structural engineers to obtain professional liability insurance, and was the outgrowth of the Structural Engineers Risk Management Council, or CIRMAC. The purpose and mission of CASE is to assist structural engineering firms to improve business and risk management practices with the ultimate goal of reducing the frequency and severity of liability claims and helping firms increase their financial position. CASE promotes guidelines, tools, contracts, and programs to reach these goals and has committees that address each of these areas.
Thank you so much, Brent. Certainly not least but last, Victor Van Santen. He's an associate vice president with HDR and the current president of SEI. Victor, can you tell us a little bit more about SEI?
Yeah, sure, Emily. So the Structural Engineering Institute grew out of the structural division of ASCE and became the first official institute of ASCE back in 1996. Last year, we celebrated our 25th anniversary, and now there are currently 9 institutes of ASCE. SEI has about 30,000 members, including 60 chapters and 20 plus graduate student chapters worldwide. And we have different grades of membership, including student, member, and fellow grades of membership. Within SEI, there are 5 different divisions, and those include things like business and professional activities, codes and standards, global activities. We have a local activities division and a technical activities division. Our board has 10 board level committees, and then the organization has about 100 committees overall within those 5 divisions. So there's a lot of ways to get involved. Our annual Structures Congress is going to be in person, April 20th to the 23rd in Atlanta. And I hope to see many of you online at that event. Emily, back to you.
Thank you, Victor. All right, so as committed, we're going to help you get familiar, maybe refresh your memory on the joint vision for the future of structural engineering. I'm going to ask Brent to maybe give us a little bit of background on the purpose of the vision and how it came to be.
Sure, thanks, Emily. In 2013, SEI published a paper titled "A Vision for the Future of Structural Engineering and Structural Engineers, A Case for Change." NCSEA, SEI, and CASE felt that the organizations needed more collaboration and coordination. The leadership of the three organizations started holding periodic meetings together beginning in 2017. In 2018, SEI asked for input from NCSEA and CASE as they intended to update that earlier document. Collectively, the three organizations agreed that a common vision was important. Vision for the Future of Structural Engineering is a one-page summary crafted jointly by the three organizations. This vision summary was approved by the leadership of each organization and signed by all of the organizations in mid-2019. Back to you, Emily.
Thank you, Brent. I have to admit, a one-page vision is pretty awesome. I like its conciseness. So with that being said, maybe we can walk through exactly what that vision says. We've alluded to initiatives, and I'd like to maybe put Ed and Victor on the spot to walk us through some of those initiatives of the joint vision. Why were they identified? Why are they important to structural engineering? So Victor, can you walk us through the first 5 initiatives?
Yeah, sure, Emily. So the first initiative of the joint vision of the future of structural engineering is on the screen here, is to develop and position structural engineers as leaders and innovators on projects and in society. You know, structural engineers often possess the natural inclination towards leadership and innovation due to our analytical skills and critical thinking. However, we often lack the training to best lead our industry and society. And sometimes we're our worst advocates due to our humble kind of working behind the scenes, making society better. And we'll talk more about this initiative, number 1, later on in the town hall, but suffice it to say, all these organizations are working hard to provide leadership training opportunities. We really didn't discuss this second initiative, which is to reform structural engineering education at the 2021 town hall. An SEI task committee titled Committee on Reform of Structural Engineering Education 2, or CROSSE 2, has been working hard, meeting regularly over the past 2 years, and has been tasked with reviewing the following questions. So what are the top technical, societal, and environmental drivers that will impact structural engineering? And what will the profession of structural engineering look like? And what skills, knowledge, and attitudes of structural engineers will be required to meet future demands and opportunities? The CROSSE 2 committee is preparing its recommendations for reform in structural engineering education over the next 5 years, and their final report is due to the Board of Governors next month at Structures Congress. Looking forward to that. We also didn't talk much about this third initiative, which is to improve mentoring of young structural engineers at the town hall last year either. Each of the organizations has focused on this important effort, both formally and informally, to guide our next generation of leaders at all levels. The fourth initiative of the joint vision is to enhance the professional development of practicing structural engineers. And each of our organizations are committed to providing professional development opportunities. And you all on this call are beneficiaries of those opportunities, such as webinars and conferences, committees and networking events. We're all committed to seeing ways to collaborate in these areas to provide quality content experiences for our members. And the fifth initiative of the joint vision is to advocate for structural engineering licensure. And this is one of the first areas of joint collaboration that these three organizations worked on even before the joint vision was created. And Brent is going to talk more about this more in depth later on. Emily?
Super, thank you, Victor. Super ambitious initiatives. I already see people with interest in them coming through the chat and the Q&A. So it's great to hear there's some interest in the first 5 of the initiatives. Ed, can you take us through the last 5 initiatives?
Okay, so number 6 is to implement performance-based codes and standards. All 3 of our organizations acknowledge that prescriptive code-based design can only get us so far in truly building resilient communities. Performance-based design leverages the expertise of structural engineers in the design of efficient structures, allowing our profession to make meaningful contributions to resilience. As such, we see performance-based design as a big part of the future of structural engineering. A performance-based structural fire safety design document and a pre-standard for performance-based wind design are both available currently, with more guides and standards sure to come. The next initiative, number 7, is to encourage resilience in the built environment, including disaster response planning. This past year, we saw the collapse of the Surfside condominium tower in Florida, devastating tornadoes in Kentucky and neighboring states, nearly $100 billion worth of damage done by Hurricane Ida, and numerous failures of bridges and other components of our aging infrastructure. All of these events heighten the need for our profession to help build more resilience into our communities. From improving design standards to enhancing our relationships with state and local authorities, structural engineers are uniquely positioned to move the needle on resilience. Next up is to promote diversity within the structural engineering profession. Now, I think we can probably all admit that in general, our profession does not reflect the level of diversity seen in the communities which we serve. Our 3 organizations firmly believe that a diverse and inclusive structural engineering community is essential to the advancement of the profession. Through building an environment of inclusivity and equity in structural engineering, where all voices are heard and perspectives considered, we will help ensure a robust, forward-thinking future for structural engineering. Number 9, almost there, is to collaborate on common causes with related industry organizations. Aspirationally, our 3 organizations would like to be a part of something bigger than just structural engineering, so that we might be able to affect change on a larger scale. As Victor mentioned previously, we seek to position structural engineers as innovators and leaders in society. And through collaboration with others outside of our profession on common causes, we can make meaningful progress in that direction. Last but not least is to advance the structural engineering profession nationally and globally. Much of what we've already highlighted serves the purpose of advancing the profession. The key aspect of this particular initiative is the recognition that we are all in this together, pulling in the same direction. We are committed to applying our skills as problem solvers to the common goal of making the profession better for the next generation of structural engineers than it was for us. This involves not only structural engineers that are members of our organizations, but structural engineers across the globe.
All right, for those joining us, this is your first chance to give us some direct feedback on these 10 initiatives. We are really interested in hearing from you. So we're going to take a quick poll, and we'd like you to tell us which of these 10 initiatives are most important to you, to the SE profession. And on this particular poll, you have the ability to choose multiple answers. So we realize all 10 are important, but maybe prioritize your top few that you think are very most important to us as a profession. You'll recognize them hopefully from the outline that was just given to you. And while we're working on completing this poll, I'm just going to remind you quickly to enter your questions in the Q&A pod. I see a few of them coming through. I'll tell you, it's not often you get the chance to query the leadership of these 3 structural engineering organizations. And as a moderator, I even invite you to maybe bring on some tough questions. That's why we're here today. So while the poll results are stabilizing, I'd like to share one other exciting thing about our commitment to this annual town hall event. We are hoping to be able to both act on your feedback, but also compare how your feedback changes year on year. So with that, I'd like to show you a slide here that actually has the results to this same survey from last year. I'm going to invite you to do a little self-organization here. So on your left-hand side, or on your left-hand side of your Zoom screen, you're going to see the results to last year's poll. And then you'll have within Zoom the ability to pull the poll over from here, this year's poll. And we'll just briefly look through that. So first, looking at last year, we heard loud and clearly that developing leaders and innovators was really important. I am seeing that, again, still show up very near the top of our list. And we have some interesting commitments to that particular initiative that we're excited to share with you shortly. I see, again, advancing the profession continues to be a really, really important metric for us all. Interestingly, I see professional development may be more important, more highly noted this year than last year. And that's something that the leadership commits to taking into account as we move forward. So thank you so much for sharing your results. We will take these back with us, and we will prioritize our initiatives based on your feedback here today. So as we mentioned at the opening, these three organizations have been working really hard on these joint initiatives. And before we get to the open forum, I'd like to spend a little bit of time sharing these joint successes with you. So our joint vision, you heard it earlier, has always had a focus on community resilience and post-disaster response. However, as Ed noted, the collapse of the Champlain Tower in Surfside uniquely impacted us as structural engineers, both individually and as a profession. Each of our organizations has been working diligently on providing support to the efforts that have come from this disaster. I'd like to invite both Ed and Brent to share a little bit more about the structural engineers profession's response to this tragedy.
Thanks, Emily. The Surfside collapse in Florida has heightened our focus on the structural engineers' role in community resilience. And our organizations are pursuing initiatives that cover several aspects of that resilience. Structural engineers have had a role in maintaining our current built environment for many years. Often structural assessments for building structures have occurred when there is a desire to upgrade, change, or repurpose an existing building. In regions of the country that are most subject to seismic activity, assessments have been made when jurisdictions have determined that there is a need based on vulnerable building types. Surfside has brought to fore the need for assessments based on other environmental conditions as well, and building use. The SE's role in the conditions assessment of existing buildings is something that is currently being studied by all three organizations. NCSEA and SEI have been following the national discussion relative to this topic since the Surfside collapse, attending a workshop hosted by the Building Officials Association of Florida, and attempting to add the point of view of structural engineering practitioners to the conversation. Regarding Florida, the Florida legislature recently voted against the Surfside bill, which would have created regulations relative to conditions assessments. SEI's CSAD voted to move the existing guideline for structural condition assessment of existing buildings into a manual of practice. And NCSEA has formed a working group on existing building maintenance and post-occupancy inspections that will serve as a forum for discussion for practicing structural engineers on that topic. And lastly, CASE is reviewing and updating their existing guideline addressing the preparation of assessment reports, and is also updating the professional agreement for existing building assessments. There are important issues that need to be addressed as guidelines and criteria for structural assessments are developed and as existing guidelines are improved. Engineers are keenly aware of their ethical responsibilities to the public and to their clients. Liability concerns and how to appropriately limit professional and business risk while meeting professional and ethical standards is critical. Ed will now discuss another aspect of the SE's involvement in community resilience.
Thanks, Brent. Yeah, so the next aspect of community resilience being worked on is disaster response. As I mentioned previously, there's much work to do to position structural engineers to better assist communities in time of need after a natural disaster. I'm going to get on my soapbox a little bit. So after the tornadoes that hit Kentucky and the neighboring states, it took well over a couple of months to get the state of Kentucky to adopt some memo of understanding with the Structural Engineers Association of Kentucky to allow for second responders to contribute and respond after natural disasters. This came on the heels of nearly 2 years of working with the legislature in the state of Kentucky on such a memorandum of understanding. And it took that disastrous set of tornadoes to, I guess, accelerate it, but still 2.5 years is in my opinion, way too long, and we need to do better. So whether it's earthquakes, hurricanes, tornadoes, or collapses such as Surfside, our 3 organizations continue to work on getting the pieces in place so that we engineers can respond effectively and efficiently in the aftermath of these disasters. This includes working to establish liability protections for second responders, improving the efficiency of the second responder deployment mechanism, like I discussed before, and developing a formalized media response plan that will allow for uniform, accurate messaging across the industry after a disaster occurs. Each of our organizations is embracing the opportunity and working toward defining and elevating the role of the structural engineer in community resilience. As practitioners, all of us on this call today are keenly aware of our ethical responsibilities to the public and to our clients. It's imperative that we continue to find ways to navigate the legislative and liability hurdles so that we can fulfill these responsibilities when we're needed the most.
Thank you, Brent. Thank you, Ed. And thank you specifically to all those who have contributed to search and rescue, post-collapse investigation, discussions on codes and standards, or improving our profession's ability to respond to similar events. I'd like to send out a heartfelt message of support to our Florida engineers with us here today. I know I speak for all of us when I say our thoughts and ongoing commitment are with you and your community. But I'd like to change gears and respond to the overwhelming interest we received both in last year's poll and this year's poll on the topic of leadership. Victor, I'm going to point this one at you. The Joint Vision actually lists this as our #1 top of the page, developing structural engineers to be leaders on project teams and in society. Can you share a little bit about what these organizations are doing to drive this initiative into reality?
Yeah, thanks, Emily. So as you mentioned, initiative #1 in the Joint Vision was to develop and position structural engineers as leaders and innovators. And the steps these organizations are taking are something that I'm excited about. Each of the organizations are providing opportunities for members to grow in leadership skills through webinars and training seminars. However, all 3 organizations are currently participating in a collective task committee called the Building Structural Leaders Committee. And they're charged with producing a strategic plan that the structural engineering community with a roadmap to support and facilitate the development of structural engineers into effective leaders. And this committee, the Building Structural Leaders Committee, is set to complete its work this fall. And I'm excited to see the results of this work. And when we get the results, looking forward to seeing what they have to say. And something else I'm excited about is that a structural engineering leadership academy has been funded by SEI Futures Fund and will be collectively developing a curriculum for a pilot program focused on younger members with the collaboration of all 3 organizations. And the organizations, we signed an MOU that commits each of us to the mission and vision of this academy. And the joint planning group was formed about 2 years ago, and we've had lots of planning sessions in which we formalized the direction and plotted a path going forward. This is being developed as a program that will be open to structural engineers, regardless of which association or organization they belong to. And more information about this Structural Engineering Leadership Academy will roll out over the next several months. But you can say that you heard about it first at this town hall.
Thanks, Victor. And that's really exciting news that I'm sure our younger engineers in particular are excited to learn more about. The next one, we're going to pivot towards diversity, equity, inclusion. And if I'm being honest, I'm following the Q&A that's coming through, and I can feel that this is something that many of our attendees are interested in hearing more about. We admit that it's been a challenge in our profession, and frankly, for many professions for some time. Over the last 2 years, our profession has shown a renewed commitment to improving DEI in our profession. Ed, what are the organizations doing together in the DEI venue?
Yeah, so maybe a little background to get everybody up to speed who may not be aware of it, what's been going on. So the murder of George Floyd and the social unrest following it in May of 2020 brought forth numerous stories from individuals in the structural engineering community who have suffered discrimination, injustice, intimidation, or have feared for their safety at one point or many points in their life. So these stories galvanized our three organizations, and as a first step, we issued a joint call to action, and that's up on your screen now. So you can kind of see that. It may not be able to read the text, but I encourage you to Google this document, and you can see what the statements are. But this document commits us to working together to strengthen our existing programs for diversity, equity, and inclusion so that we can collectively accelerate progress to a more just and safe environment for all members of our profession. So nearly 2 years later, I can report that we are moving the needle, ever so slowly, but we are moving it. Through the efforts of ASCE's Mosaic program, NCSEA's SE3 committee, SEI's DEI committee, and the newly formed NCSEA Foundation, we're taking thoughtful, intentional action that is having some good results. This includes the development of resources for firm leaders on topics ranging from curbing discrimination and harassment in the workplace to DEI-focused recruiting strategies. In addition, the NCSEA DEI Scholarship Program was established in 2021, and all our organizations continue to develop DEI education opportunities for our members, including the upcoming session at Structures Congress entitled Structural Engineering Through the Lens of Equity and Inclusion. Through these joint efforts, we're starting to reshape the profession into one that is more inclusive and equitable for all. This is really tough stuff, and will require a sustained level of focus from not only our three organizations, but from each of you on this call today. The more our profession reflects these values, perspectives, and cultures of the communities we live and work in, the more resilient and robust it will be.
Ed, thank you very much. I'm going to echo your sentiments. Commitments needed at all levels, not just from the leadership, but from those of you here on the call, if we're going to move the needle in the DEI world. And if you're interested in participating in this effort, and I see a lot of you here in the chat with passion, there are some interesting links in the chat that you can follow to figure out how to get involved in DEI specific efforts and opportunities. Okay, so Brent, you're up. We are going to pivot a little bit to SE licensure. We've been talking about this for some time, and I'm interested in hearing if there are any licensure updates for us this year.
Thanks, Emily. We do have a few updates. As discussed in last year's town hall, SE licensure is supported by all three organizations and led to the creation of the Structural Engineers Licensure Coalition, SELC, which also included SECB. So a little update here. As many participants today are probably aware, SECB will cease functioning as of the 31st of March, and SELC will then comprise NCSEA, SEI, and CASE. The new governing rules for SELC have been approved by all of the organizations and will be effective on the 1st of April. The SELC mission remains to serve as a unified voice for the structural engineering profession with the ultimate goal of licensure in all U.S. jurisdictions. SELC primarily will be a clearinghouse and oversight group in order to avoid overlap and duplication as the various organizations' licensure committees work to promote SE licensure. In 2020, SELC published a vision for the future of structural engineering licensure, which includes a history on licensure and examinations, licensure in other professions, trends, as well as threats to SE licensure, and an implementation plan. And this document is available on the SELC website and should be referenced back by the other three organizations' websites if you're interested in it. It's a fairly lengthy document. SE licensure is a state level issue, and therefore requires grassroots efforts by structural engineers in the states that are pursuing SE licensure. And this is important in order for this to be successful. Florida is close to having a form of SE licensure. After stalling last year, the bill gained traction this year, and in a compromise, the legislature recently passed an SE Title Act, and it's currently on the governor's desk for signature. So we'll see where that goes. Engineers in Texas have been actively pursuing SE licensure, but are meeting some resistance there. Another issue that is on the horizon related to licensure is computer-based testing, or CBT. This is an important issue for all of us to keep informed on. The proposal is to use an independent testing agency and then require the exams to be taken at their locations may pose a barrier to licensure for future SEs. The tentative plan for implementation is 2024, and a structural engineering caucus led by SEI will be held in August to further address this issue. So we'll keep our eye on that and see what comes of that discussion.
Thank you, Brent. And I just want to again send a little shout out. I see many of you guys here on our call today, but thank you to those tireless efforts of our volunteers who have advocated for licensure in your particular state. It's really important, and your efforts are not unseen. So thank you. All right, Victor, I'm going to call you back up here. Changing gears again, with the increasing focus on climate change and the growing awareness of contribution of the built environment to carbon emissions, what is the structural engineering profession doing to contribute to a more sustainable built environment?
As many of you know, the SE 2050 commitment program was created to make substantial reductions in embodied carbon in structural systems. The SE 2050 challenge is to transform the practice of structural engineering in a way that is holistic and firm-wide and project-based and data-driven. By prioritizing reduction of embodied carbon through the use of less materials or less impactful structural materials, participating firms can more easily work toward a net zero embodied carbon structural system by 2050. So far, there are 75 structural engineering firms have signed up for the challenge. And you can see who's signed up on the link that was just put on this chat, se2050.org. There are 43 signatory embodied carbon action plans, and these have been collected and published on the website as well. And the database of structural systems embodied carbon, launched in November 2021, has collected over 100 projects so far. SE 2050 and SEI and NCSEA are coordinating efforts for messaging and technical support. And SE 2050 has engaged with the AIA Large Firm Roundtable on developing education and examples of what best practices look like. A team has had coordination calls with the developers of life cycle assessment tools and software over the last several years, and they're coordinating a business plan and fundraising efforts going forward. I encourage everyone on this call, take some time to look at the updates and resources that are available on the website.
Thanks, Victor. Before we leave you, I have another question along a similar theme. We as engineers, we know our codes use historical data looking backwards to generate our design loads, wind, snow, rain, in ASCE 7 and other standards. So what is our profession doing to ensure that our codes are more future looking and considering climate impacts?
Well, it's funny you should ask that. We just had a climate workshop just last week on March 10th that brought together leading client scientists and the SEI environmental hazard modelers. Currently, the hazard models in ASCE 7 rely on historic data only, and the purpose of the workshop was to build relationships with client science community to provide a more forward-looking hazard models in future editions of the standards. And the workshop went really well. It was over 120 participants. And not only was the opening session of the workshop, since they had to go virtual, and the closing session will be held in May. After the individual hazard working groups, which included ice, rain, flood, snow, and wind, they'll continue to meet every couple of months and continue to develop working relationships on the problems. And they're also developing a research needs list to help with discussions with their federal partners. And reports from the workshop is going to be available later this fall. So keep your eyes open for that. And I also noted it's going to be posted online, and you're probably going to see an article in the lectures manual. So keep your eyes open for that as well. Emily.
Thank you, Victor. It's really great to hear structural engineers are not just following along or contributing to, but also leading some of these conversations around sustainability and climate impacts. All right, we're getting close to the open portion of our discussion. So I'd like to just remind you to input your questions in the Q&A pod. I see a ton of great ones coming through. Before we get there, though, I want to finish with some shared successes in advocating for our profession. I see that as a really common theme that's already come through the chat here today. You heard before, but we are such a noble profession, and admittedly, we aren't always the best at communicating our value outside of our little professional circle. So I'd like to ask Brent and Ed together to comment on what we're doing to improve our visibility.
Thanks, Emily. Engineering associations and organizations that we all belong to all have a responsibility to advocate for their membership and for engineering in general. Individually, as structural engineers should also be active in advocating for their profession whenever they have that opportunity. And frankly, as Emily just mentioned, sometimes engineers are not very skilled or vocal in this area, and we need to do better. Because if we don't advocate for ourselves, no one else will. As structural engineers push for SE licensing in additional states that don't have licensure currently, it's important that the public and public officials are aware of what we do and why we are an essential component of the built environment. Ed will discuss some of the more specific ways that NCSEA is advocating for SEs.
Yeah, thanks, Brent. I'm really excited to share this with the group today. So last year, NCSEA made a significant commitment to the structural engineering community through the development and launch of its brand and marketing campaign for the structural engineering profession. The impetus of this initiative was a call from NCSEA member organizations for help in increasing the awareness and perceived value of the structural engineering profession within the AEC industry, as well as to the public as a whole. Through a collaboration between NCSEA, its member organizations, and the marketing firm Agency McKenna, the We See Above and Beyond campaign was developed and deployed on NCSEA social media platforms in fall of 2021. Many of NCSEA's member organizations have joined the campaign through the Brand Ambassador Program, posting the campaign materials on their state SEA's social media platforms. Individual members of SEI have been participating at the state level as well with campaign implementation, further increasing the reach and effectiveness of the campaign. I'd like to build off what Brent just said about, if we don't advocate for ourselves, no one else will. And encourage all of you on the call today to support this campaign by following NCSEA on Facebook and LinkedIn, and sharing the We See posts with your personal and professional connections. In addition, check out the landing page for the campaign, which is www.weseeaboveandbeyond.com, to get more insight on how you can advocate for the structural engineering profession.
Thank you, Ed. Thank you, Brent. And again, a brief call to all those interested parties. If any of these initiatives sound exciting to you, there are really great links in the chat to get involved. So I'm going to finish up with our last joint success here, and I'm going to ask Victor to speak to this one. How are our professional organizations doing with membership, and how might a young engineer get involved?
Yeah, a couple of things that have been on the minds of all three of our organizations are membership and engagement. Now, I would like to say that everyone on this call is a member of one of our organizations, but I understand from some of our registration information that there are quite a few of you that are not already members. But for those of you who are members, you already know that the value of membership, of learning and networking through membership and involvement in your organizations. If you're not a member of one of the organizations, what are you waiting for? Membership is a critical staying on top of the latest knowledge and practices and to learn from expert peers and colleagues. Membership also advances your career and the profession in general through volunteering on a committee, whether it's a technical committee or developing standards or business practices. Participating in local, professional, or student chapters are great ways to grow your leadership skills as well. And membership can be advanced by sharing the knowledge you gain with your staff team. You can do a lunch and learn back at the office after going to a conference. And when you gain the support of your supervisor and your employer, they can increase the amount of coworkers that can participate in organizations as well. So, we can grow membership by engaging the next diverse generation of students and younger members through scholarships and mentoring and special opportunities to serve on committees. For instance, SEI is a current call out to younger members to serve as the secretary on the Resilience Committee and on the Performance-Based Design Committee. Our organizations are doing great things to encourage students while they're in college, encouraging active participation in our professional societies as younger members after they graduate. And we need to continue to mentor young structural engineers and give them meaningful roles in our organizations. As they flourish, thrive in our organizations, they will initiate or invite colleagues to join them as well. And collectively, we need to strengthen the structural engineering profession through active recruitment and engagement and retention of students and young members, and really everyone throughout their careers.
Thank you, Victor. And it's great to see all of this collaboration we just shared with you. I know that it reflects the really hard work of your leadership, who I would like to just remind you are also volunteers. So great to see the collaboration, and thank you to all of our SEI, CASE, and NCSEA leadership for your efforts. I'd like to again pause and give you, our participants, the opportunity to give us some feedback on those collaborative initiatives you just heard about. So please tell us which one of these collaboration focus areas you would like to see us to continue to focus on. Again, this is a poll that you can choose more than one. And your options, again, these are the ones you just heard, but community resilience along the Surfside theme, leadership development, building DEI in our profession, SE licensure, sustainability and climate change, advocating for the structural engineering profession, and strengthening the structural engineering profession. So we're getting really close to Q&A. So while we're waiting for those results to come in, please enter your questions in the Q&A pod, and we'll go ahead and we'll share the results here. So advocating for the structural engineering profession and strengthening the structural engineering profession, those two came out right at the top. And I think that's great. That's why we're here today. I'm very excited to see that DEI follows closely behind, and a commitment to sustainability, SE licensure, resilience, leadership development. Looks like there's interest in all of them. So that's great feedback. And again, we do take this feedback very seriously in planning the upcoming year between our joint leadership group. So we are now going to roll into, I think you guys are all here for, and that is our Q&A, our open forum, where you have the chance to ask questions of the leaders of our three organizations. I'm thrilled and a little intimidated at the volume of questions we've received, and I will do my best to work our way through them and get to as many of them as possible. I'm going to start with a question that plays a little bit off of how Victor just left us with a call to action for our young engineers. And Ed, I'm going to put you on the hot spot. I am going to, Ed, I'm going to put this one to you. Involvement at the national level can be intimidating for a young engineer. Yet we need young voices at the table when national initiatives are being discussed. What would you say to a young professional to motivate them to get involved at the national level?
That's a good question. I asked myself that. I had that dilemma myself. So I think, there's an adage like, what is it? How do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. I think, when you look at national level involvement, you think about that, it might be like overwhelming, like, oh my God, it's national, it's huge. There's going to be thousands of people looking at me, wanting to know what I know and relying on me to do stuff, big scale things. Well, really, it's not that way. I think each of our organizations is broken down into a number of different committees, a number of different smaller areas where you can get involved. So I guess my recommendation would be to find an area that you're passionate about. If it's advocacy, or if it's sustainability, or if it's DEI, find that slot within the National Association that you want to, have your voice heard in, and sign up. Reach out through the websites of our organizations, get a hold of the committee chairs that chair those committees, and say, hey, I would like to participate, and be very clear about what your time commitment availability is. If you have reservations about your level of competency, is saying, oh, I'm not sure if I have value to add here, but I want to participate. Just be honest and jump in. We all start, all of us here today on this call, Emily, Brent, Victor, we all started, we had to jump in at some point, and we did not start out as presidents of our organization. We've been involved for years, and we started out at the committee level and kind of worked our way up. So just, don't be afraid of the elephant. Just take a bite.
Can I add one thing to that? Because I think Ed's comments are fantastic. And as he mentioned, most of us have been involved in one way or another with maybe all of the organizations at some point. It's not too young for anybody to ask to be involved. And keep in mind that we all are volunteers. Everybody that works at any committee level in any of the organizations are volunteers. And I don't know of any instances personally when somebody's been turned away when they've asked to participate in some way. So we're always looking for additional help.
Yeah, and you heard about a number of committees and opportunities on this call that we talked about. And there's a lot of different committees and other opportunities out there that you might not be aware of, and there might be something that really sparks your interest. So I encourage you to see what those different opportunities, what those committees are. Maybe it's something in a technical area that you're interested in participating on, or hearing about the latest advances in those technologies, or it's something else, more professional development or business practices that you're passionate about and you want to contribute to. Get involved. You can have the best voice for our profession when you're involved in these activities.
Perfect. Thanks, guys. Little bites of the elephant. That's what I heard. Advance warning, Brent. This one's coming your way. I'm going to read it from our Q&A. It seems like our industry is being undermined by lowballers and those who cut corners or cut costs by cutting corners. What are we doing to push for merit-based procurement for all structural engineering projects outside of publicly funded projects?
That's a great question. In my opinion, one of the biggest responsibilities lies with us as practicing engineers to do our best to make sure that the way contracts are awarded are based on merit. It's a difficult thing, and in reality, we've all experienced it. Sometimes we are our own worst enemy. We all know of maybe other engineers or other firms that maybe view what we do as just any other business commodity and not a profession. We need to act like professionals, and to say that there's a magic pill to solve this problem, I don't know what it is. I know that personally in our firm and even in the discussions we have on this with Case, we strive to fall back on what we just talked about, advocating for the profession, making sure that
Mhm.
our clients and potential clients understand what it is we do and the value that we provide, so that it's the value that we're actually basing our fees on, and not just the fact that we're producing documents and allowing somebody to get a building permit. I don't know the specific answer to this, other than we all have to make an effort and we all have to be involved to try and lift this part of our practice.
And I might chime in here. I don't know that this is unique to structural engineering. I think there's a lot of professions that suffer the same plight. There's always going to be the players that do that undercut to get the work, and it's unfortunate. And I think it comes down to the individual, to the firm leaders to decide. Are they going to maintain their ethical obligation and do it the right way and operate ethically, or are they going to depart and do that? So we as our three organizations can offer resources and education and to make sure that engineers are as proficient as possible and as protected as possible. But at the end of the day, I think this is something that's just endemic in business, and it's unfortunate. So that's my perspective anyway.
Yeah, and from my part, I would say educating our private clients in this area is something we have to take seriously. And when we see that things are becoming more commoditized, we need to really tell them, the value in our profession and that the qualifications are really important and that they need to be considered and not just price. And sometimes you get what you pay for, but our clients don't always believe that, and they sometimes learn it the hard way. But we need to educate them as well, because a lot of times our clients are not structural engineers and they don't know the value of structural engineering like we do. So we need to inform them.
Perfect. I'm going to switch gears a little bit. I'm going to go to a question that actually has gotten bumped a few times. People have said, yes, that one, I want that one answered. And it also follows along, if you're following the chat, the direction the chat has headed. So it admits that the future of structural engineering relies on structural engineers to carry our profession. It acknowledges that the vision is pushing for a lot of requirements in structural engineering analysis, licensure, performance-based design, but maybe that the vision is light on recruiting, retention, children, dependent care issues. And so the question is, can we really build a strong future for structural engineering while struggling to retain good engineers and struggling to recruit new ones? Specifically, have the findings of SE3 committee been discussed by NCSEA case SEI? And Ed, I'll go ahead and hand that one to you first, but I welcome anyone's input.
Yeah, the first thought that occurs to me is the great work that SE3 has been doing in this realm, and they have conducted several industry-wide surveys and taken the results of those surveys and published guides for employers on how to overcome some of these obstacles that were mentioned in the question. And so again, that's what I see as the role of our national organizations here, is to develop the resources for firm leaders to use in their practice. And so those resources are available, and SE3 continues to work and refining those things and adding to them as they kind of get the feedback from their surveys to understand what the industry really needs. So I would point to that first. I don't know if Brent and Victor want to add to that at all.
I would just add that there are additional tools available for, I think, through all three organizations as we look at what we need to do to build our profession. I mean, it's clear that if we don't attract and then retain the best talent, it's going to be a very difficult thing for us. So again, as with many of these issues, it takes time, but we all have to be aware of it and do the best we can to attract the talent. But then we need to do the things within our own firms to keep good people and to make people feel comfortable and welcome and successful in their engineering practice.
Yeah, and we would solicit the help of, everyone on this call as well for advocating and, strengthening our profession. Those are, as we saw in the poll a few minutes ago, those are very important. And, it takes an army to do that, and not just a few leaders and organizations. So, it's a collective work that we all need to participate in recruiting and retaining, the next generations of our profession.
Perfect. Victor, stay off mute because I'm going to throw this one to you. What advice can you give to a younger engineer to help their firm catch the vision of this joint initiative, especially if the firm hasn't placed a priority on mentoring or education of newer engineers?
Yeah, that's a good question. If you are able to participate in some of these activities, a committee or going to a conference, and you can bring that back to your organization. Like I said before, if you could present a lunch and learn of something that you went and learned about, you're now bringing value back to your organization, and they get a benefit from your activities, and they'll then sort of catch that vision, as you said, of having other people participate, because they see that there's benefit, not just maybe through technical things where you're learning new skills, but maybe you're also getting more networking, and gaining more clients, or a greater network of interactions within the profession. Our companies generally know the value of that. Sometimes they have to weigh it against the costs, and there's the rub. So when you can show them there's actual business value and also professional value, and you would like to stay at that company because they support your activities, those are all things that your employers will listen to. And I think you just need to continue to remind them of that, show them the benefits of the things that you've experienced, and they'll get on board.
Perfect.
I'd like to add to that too, because I agree. I think sometimes we forget that the leadership in firms have a lot of things on their plates too. And although these things are important, sometimes they maybe inadvertently get pushed aside. So I would suggest that if you feel like there's things that need to be advanced within your firm, you have those discussions. And it just occurred to me, if you're not participating in maybe all three of these organizations, and they all provide opportunities to provide value to a firm, one of the best resources, I think, is the Structure magazine, because there's information on upcoming webinars, seminars, publications that all three organizations make everybody aware of in that magazine. And that's an opportunity to become aware of maybe some opportunities that you can take advantage of individually and then maybe promote within your firm.
Brent, stay off mute. I'm going to go right back to you. And I'm going to call this the $1 million question. It's been asked in a few different varieties. I'm going to hit you this first one, then Ed, I'm going to follow up with a slightly different permutation on it. So Brent, you ready? With three organizations representing structural engineers, individuals and firms feel financial and time pressure with involvement and membership in more than one organization. Why do we have so many organizations?
That's a good question. And it's a question that probably every one of us that are on this panel have asked ourselves. I know personally, I've thought about that a lot of times over the years. I think the short answer is that there's value in each of the separate organizations that each of those organizations provide, because that's what's in their wheelhouse. I know that's a simplified answer, but personally, I belong to all three organizations. I joined ASCE as a college student decades ago and have maintained my membership ever since. I belong to NCSEA through my membership in the Structural Engineers Association of Utah. Those both are individual memberships, as we've talked about before. I participate in CASE because our firm belongs to ACEC, and CASE is a coalition with ACEC, and it provides that opportunity. So that's making the answer a little bit long, but each one of those groups has a specific value that I personally feel. Now, it seems like that's a lot of, and it is, a lot of involvement. But for instance, in our firm, we're still a small firm, but we have individuals that are involved with each of the different groups so that it doesn't fall as a burden on any one person, but we are able to take advantage of the expertise and the value each provides. There are dues involved, obviously, but we've also felt that over the years in our firm that we've more than made back whatever we paid in dues in either financial opportunities because of things we've learned and developed, or the intrinsic value of what we have had the opportunity to do through networking and association with other engineers through these organizations. Sorry, that was a long
No,
answer.
you're good. Thank you, Brent. Ed, I told you I'm gonna give you a permutation of it again through the chat. There's an acknowledgement, while the three organizations may never merge, is there a way for the three organizations to not repeat efforts at a committee level? For instance, could NCSEA support SEI for SE 2050 and SEI support NCSEA in DEI? Seems to be diluting the effectiveness when efforts are repeated.
I would agree that we want to avoid duplication as much as possible. And I think the formation of this joint leadership coalition here is going to help that. We meet frequently, the three organizations. We meet frequently, we discuss, we coordinate our event schedules together to make sure we're not overlapping. So that stuff is happening. And I'm sorry, can you repeat? There's a part of that question I want to get back to. Can you repeat the question?
Yep, it was around not duplicating efforts. Specifically, as an example, could NCSEA support SEI's SE 2050?
Okay,
and
right. Okay, yeah, so that example right there, NCSEA just signed on to as a supporter of SE 2050, and we are working with SEI to find ways to move that needle within NCSEA by supporting their efforts in that challenge. So those conversations are happening, and we are working together. And likewise on the DEI front, while NCSEA is perhaps a bit more active in that currently, SEI is joining in the conversations through this joint leadership council that we have, and we are kind of working towards common goals. So yeah, avoiding duplication sure is a main thing that I think this group can help alleviate. So
can I add a follow up to that? Because that's 100% true. And maybe we already discussed this, but a perfect example of that is regarding licensure, where SELC is the group that's organized by all three organizations that is kind of doing oversight so that there isn't duplication, that the various committees that are involved with that at the individual level are not duplicating effort. And that's the whole point of SELC. And we probably need to do more of that with other areas. But I think compared to where we have been like 5 years ago and 10 years ago, there's a lot more collaboration and less duplication now than there used to be.
For sure.
All right, Victor, I'm going to give one back to you. We've been a little bit quiet on the engineering education reform that's in the joint vision, but we have one particular questioner who is dismayed with the short-sightedness of the organization's education committees not looking outward. University education is a precursor to all problems and issues in the joint vision. Question, is it too late to change to affect a positive change in university structural engineering education?
Is it too late to affect a positive change in structural
Yeah,
engineering
I
education?
think, is it too late to make sure that reforming engineering education, structural engineering education is part of our joint vision?
Well, the short answer is no. But if it's a question of changing the joint vision itself, the document is a time stamp of when we put together this joint vision together. And though we haven't edited it per se, it's a living document of what we see as our profession are the needs for the future of structural engineering. And I also saw some comments in there about some other things that might have been not specifically noted in the joint vision, and there are ways we can revisit that in the coming years. But this was the snapshot at the time when we had collectively put our thoughts together, and we agreed on these 10 items. And the list was actually a lot longer. We cut it down to 10, and it was a good number, fit on a page. And but there are a lot of things that we are going after as organizations that aren't listed as well. I don't know if that answers your question, Emily, but
I might try to add a little something about that. I think the answer is no. It's never too late. We just have to find effective ways of interfacing with higher education institutions, in letting them know what the industry needs. What is it that we need graduates to know when they leave school and enter the workplace? And I can say from NCSEA's side, we have done through our basic education committee, has done numerous surveys of universities about curriculum and which universities offer, say, courses in wood design or masonry design. And so we have all of this data, and then we actually went back and said, okay, well, now that we know this, there's not really a lot of uniformity across the nation. And this, from the practitioner's perspective, is the ideal curriculum. How can we work with you to make sure you get these courses available to your students? It's a tough conversation when you start talking about this, because the universities, it's a business, and they have to operate in a way that they can not go under financially. So they have to continually tune their curriculum and to make sure that they can attract students and get them out of school in a reasonable amount of time with a reasonable amount of cost. And so that's a business proposition, and that's a tough thing to work against as a practicing structural engineer. But we can have the conversations, and we can continually let them know that there is a need to change. And then we can also offer to be part of that change. As practitioners, we can step in and offer to serve as adjunct faculty members at a local college to teach a course in timber design or masonry design or seismic design, or something that where you feel like there is a lack. Fill the need yourself. Go out there and put yourself out there in a position to do that. So, be a part of the solution and be vocal, right?
Yeah, and going back to the committee mentioned earlier as well, that committee on the reform of structural engineering education too. There's more information that'll be coming out from their results, as mentioned, next month. And that was a collective effort, of all three organizations, in putting that together. So don't have all the answers and what their results are, but looking forward to seeing the outcome and some action plans going forward.
Alrighty, I'm gonna change gears and get to our design codes and standards. I had this question sent in advance of the town hall, and I also see it in our live Q&A pod. And it's referring to the fact that we have design codes, specifications, standards that are being updated every 3 years. Costs are rising to purchase these codes, to stay current with these codes. And the question is there anything being done to change this?
I can take that. The answer is yes. Things have been done to change that. We recognized years ago, that the structural component of the IBC is relatively small. There's a lot more to the code than just structural engineering, the structural engineering chapters. So for us to be able to affect change at that level, we have a very small voice in a very large conversation. So the approach was taken to pull the structural sections out into a series of standards, ASCE 7 and the material standards, to allow us to change that update cycle. And it's been changed to a 6-year cycle on those standards. So in a way, we've kind of ducked around that 3-year international code cycle just for structural engineers. And that's on a 6-year cycle now. So a little bit better, but I hear you about the cost of the codes. It's not easy as a practitioner to foot that bill whenever they update, but we have done some work, and hopefully we've made it a little better for everybody.
Thank you. We have a lot in the Q&A about licensure. I'll ask one generically that came through our very first question. I'm going to make sure it gets answered, but if you guys have other thoughts on licensure based on what you've seen in the Q&A or chat, feel free. So the question is, there are many registered structural engineers in states that lack the basic knowledge of engineering mechanics and structural analysis. Are the groups in support of pushing for requiring passing the NCEES SE exams in order to be a licensed structural engineer in all states?
I would say yes. I think that's part of the goal of, again, licensure is licensure by testing. Now, with that in mind, there's the politics involved with the passage of licensure laws in states. So with that in mind, there is always going to be the issue of grandfathering in current practitioners, but that will always eventually time out at some point. And so, yes, whether it's an NCEES structural test or another mechanism of testing for proficiency, I think we all agree that's what has to happen.
Mm-hmm. And that's what the Structural Engineering Licensure Coalition is advocating for.
Exactly.
All righty. Got a tough one here. So we've argued about a lot here that we need to increase the public's perception of our value in order to lead to higher fees, work-life balance, benefit, etc. But the questioner says, teachers and police are almost universally seen as extremely high value, yet aren't still highly paid. Please provide justification for this thought that increasing our value or our perception will therefore lead to increased fees.
Well, I can say that, if we don't do anything on the advocacy front, we can't expect things to improve at all. So that's what we realize at NCSEA, and I'm sure CASE and SEI have the same opinion, is that no one else is going to do this. So we can sit back and complain about our low fees and that no one knows what we do and our work is covered up, but if we're never going to solve those issues if we don't take action and start speaking up and starting to educate the public about what we do. So I guess I kind of challenge this question a little bit. If we can move the needle and improve the perceived value of our profession in the eyes of the AEC industry, in the eyes of the general public, you know, then we build the value proposition, right? And fees are definitely part of that conversation. But until we get there, until we have people, when you explain to them when you ask them, do you know what a structural engineer does? And they actually will know the answer and can tell you what it is. We're gonna face a lot of these same frustrations about fees and things. So to do nothing, we can't expect any sort of change. So that's where we're at. And that's what the We See campaign is all about, is changing that perception and educating people and moving that needle so that we can elevate that value proposition.
Thanks, Ed. I'm going to put you, Brent, on the spot here. You mentioned when we talked about licensure initially that SECB was disbanding. There's a questioner asking a little bit more background in terms of the rationale for that decision.
There probably needs to be some, the best way to get that answer is for somebody that was in the leadership of SECB. I think there are several issues. I think part of it comes down to what we've just been talking about, the avoiding duplication of effort. And secondly, SECB's participation and membership has been declining. And so I think primarily those two reasons are the gist between, or for the disbanding. As mentioned, the SELC is still active and the three organizations are actively participating together. So I don't think anything is going to drop through the cracks. Also, the early goals of SECB of certification being potentially a stopgap between PE licensure and SE licensure in a lot of states never really took hold. A lot of people had no idea, our clients, architects, others, what SECB was. So being certified at SECB probably didn't add value. And that's probably, all of those things combined led to its dissolution.
Thanks, Brent. I'm going to finish with just one question. If I had to say where I thought most of the chatter was here today, it's about retention. So I'm going to finish with a question here. And Ed, I'm going to ask you maybe if you can give it a first go. And this commenter acknowledges a trend that they've seen personally with structural engineers exiting the field for various reasons, not just moving companies within the profession, but leaving the profession after years of service. Do any committees have a means to track these statistics to determine if it's a widespread concern?
Yes, the NCSE SE3 committee, like I mentioned before, has done surveys, and they have data on this. You know, percentages of people exiting the profession. What are the reasons? Why are they leaving? You know, is it compensation? Is it discrimination? Is it just burnout? What is it? And then there are some follow-ups, you know, on, you know, once we know what the problem is and we kind of see the severity of the problem, there are some I forget what they call them, but they're recommendations back to employers about what you can do to try to combat this. So tools, educational programs, that type of thing to help you curb that within your own firm or within the industry. So yeah, it's tough. It's real and it is happening. And perhaps even more so over the last couple of years because of the kind of the pandemic and the kind of quantum shift we've had in the whole workforce dynamic as a result of that. So it's a very real concern. And I know, you know, all of us are on this call here are employers, and I know we are very vested in finding the right solutions for that problems.
Perfect. We are at our limit for our Q&A time, but I'd like to end us here today just as we started, and that's getting one last bit of input from you all. So again, follow the QR code or go to menti.com and input the code that you have in the chat and on the screen. We'd like to know in one word, what is your greatest career development need in order to continue to be successful? We know that, like Ed just alluded to, our profession is not alone. Like many professions, our structural engineering profession faces a future full of challenges, full of uncertainty, but I would argue with equal parts opportunity. So as a profession, we need to embrace this change. We know that that is our path to a vibrant and relevant future. So as we see your needs here on the screen, our leadership group is making an ongoing commitment to this collaboration to meet your needs and to allow us to collectively be successful in our structural engineering profession. We should all be incredibly encouraged and inspired by what we've heard today. These 3 structural engineering organizations are doing their very best to ensure an exciting future for our profession. SEI, CASE, and NCSEA, we've come a really long way in our collaborative relationship, but we also acknowledge there's a lot more to do. And while we're thankful to these leaders of these organizations, we have mentioned many times here today, but the most meaningful opportunity for improvement of all of these questions that have been posed to us is when all of us, and I mean all of us, every one of you on the call here today, joins in on being part of the solution, that we work together to build a profession that leads, that innovates, that thrives. So please find your passion, find a place that you can contribute and drive our profession forward. I'd like to thank personally Ed, thank you, Brent, thank you, and Victor. Thank you. Thank you for sharing your time, your wisdom. I know you are all volunteers and you were really giving of your time in your leadership position, and even more so here sharing your wisdom with us today. And most importantly, I'd like to thank all of you here for joining us on the call. It's an honor to, with my panelists, to have the opportunity to hear your voice, hear your concerns, and ultimately work to move them forward.
Thank you so much. So that wraps up today's town hall. We hope you found it informative. Thank you very much for participating and for your thought-provoking questions. We'll now launch an exit survey. Your participation will help us improve future events. Sometime in the next week, an edited recording will be posted and you'll receive a link with more information. Please let us know if you'd like to participate in any of the activities discussed today. There's so much to be done and we're always looking for help. Contact information is on the slide here and will be repeated in the communication announcing the recording. Thank you and have a great day.